the Internet Finance Association, who did a big warning on September the 1st. There's Canada, the Canadian Securities Administrators. The FCA are very interested. They've done written warnings, but they've been very encouraging with the sandbox. South Korea, they've got the Financial Services Commission. Gibraltar's really keen on this. They've got a new Financial Services Commission who want to encourage people to move their blockchain businesses into Gibraltar. And also Malta is now suddenly becoming the key place for people in Europe to start with their ICOs. Okay, if we could have a look at slide 2, please, because what I've done is I've tried to identify the issues. The first question is, what is a token? Okay, we could probably develop this in another session, because a friend of mine, David Siegel, who runs a very successful ICO in London called Pillar, has written a book on it actually, which is available on the internet, and he's defined 60 different types really of token. They can be active, they can be passive, they can carry a payload, they can carry APIs that trigger actions like driving a car, they can carry ownership rights, smart contracts, and all sorts of things. So there's no one definition of a token. So if you're going to decide whether the token, which is subject to the offer, breaks any rules or not, you've first of all got to define what the token is. Now, there's lots of existing law around which may apply here, such as FSMA, the Financial Services Markets Act 2000. You can't engage in investment activity. But then the big issue is KYC, know your customer, money laundering, proceeds of crime. All of those laws apply in this space. So whatever anyone's thinking of doing, if they're going to do a token issue, which is a utility token, in other words, it hasn't got an investment value, then you've still got to do KYC, money laundering. But there's all sorts of other stuff out there. There's the electronic money regs, the payment services regs, the distance selling regs, the consumer protection regs. There's prospectuses, the prospectus requirements, EU directives about prospectus. And then you get into the criminal area, which is a particular area that I like, being a criminal lawyer who's moved into regulation. You get into the issue as to whether or not something is an unregulated collective investment scheme. And again, I don't think we've got the time or the bandwidth to deal in any more detail with those types of things. Suffice it to say, I was just saying a few minutes ago, we're running an event at Token Blast a week on Wednesday, I think it is, or Tuesday. There are a couple of seats available, where we're doing a bad day on the blockchain, where everything that can go wrong in a scenario is going wrong. And it's going to get very interesting. We're looking at the SFO coming in. We're looking at tipping off regulations. So the point is that anybody who's thinking of doing an ICO, and I'm not sure who's watching, are these lawyers, or is this going to people who are doing their own ICOs? There's all sorts of pitfalls here, which we've got to be careful of. Now, the next slide is quite interesting. It's one that, if we could just hook it up, I called the Gibraltar approach, because they've looked at this in great detail, and this is a guide that the FCA have unofficially said is a pretty good starting point. So anyone considering investing in tokens through an ICO is advised to consider the following. Regulation. Do you understand that tokens and ICOs are unregulated and you've got no recourse to regulatory authority, financial compensation, or the ombudsman? That's the first point. Risk. The regulators are worried stupid that people are going to be piling into these things when they don't know what they're buying. Volatility, very important. The price of these things swings. As those of you who've got a Coinbase wallet, as some of us who are watching know, 1 minute it's up, the next minute it's down. So you can lose your shirt or you can make a fortune. The other big issue is disclosures. These white papers that people put out don't really fit the bill for full disclosure about conflicts of interest. They don't decide who's going to sell the coins, why they're going to sell them, when they're going to be sold, are there restrictions on sales, and who owns them. And the big issue, of course, that Gibraltar have flagged, which is the point that I've already raised, is this question of risk appetite. What is your appetite for risk? And they all come with a big government health warning. The health warning is these things can damage your health and your wallet, so it's not really for the faint-hearted. But we did find an interesting number just a few minutes ago. I think $3.2 billion was invested last year by 220 hedge funds in this space. These are crypto hedge funds. So the message is that the financial sector is now looking at this market with a different view. It used to be it was crazy, it was underground, it was for computer techies who live underground and come out at night and wear their pajamas. But now suddenly it's becoming more respectable, and that's I think a very important move, because as the serious money moves in, the regulation and compliance will improve. So if we can move rather than run through what's going on in other countries like Switzerland and the States we'll cover in a moment, my view on the world is that as there's an absence of regulation here for utility tokens, anybody who's thinking of doing one really ought to do their own good governance. Pretend this is a regulated investment. Pretend it's an investment. What would you do? Well, you'd have to have a business plan. You'd have to have some tech. You'd have to have financial accounts and a track record. So really, shouldn't you do that even if it's an unregulated product? As I said at the outset, the big question is this object, this ICO, a utility, or is it an investment? Investment / security. In the UK, we call it an investment. In America, they call it a security. If it's an investment or a security, then it's regulated. If it's a utility token, so people say, it's not regulated. Now, what's happened, which is the new slide, which is very important, is the SEC have finally come down and said, we don't like these things. We think virtually all of these raises are not utility tokens. They are securities. And on the 11th of March, they did an update and have issued subpoenas. People who are following this space will no doubt know that a lot of the large ICOs have been on the receiving end of subpoenas. These are firms who have raised huge amounts of money, sometimes 50, 100, 150, 200, even 400 million pounds or dollars have been raised. And the point is, if you've raised money in the States, even if your ICO is based in Switzerland, as many are, or in the UK, the SEC are interested, and the question is, what is going to happen? The position clarified a little a couple of days ago, where guidance is now being given. They're saying now, the SEC, that tokens are almost always securities. There's a case called the Munchie test, which people may have seen or read about, which defines the Howey test for whether something is a security or not. The Munchie test is something I often call the duck test. If it looks like a duck, it walks like a duck, and it quacks, it's a duck. And that's really what they said in Munchie. They said that you've got to have tech. You've got to be just selling fuel or the right to use the software. And that involves a whole new issue, which I don't think we've got time to cover here in detail, which is the SAFT, which is a simple agreement for future tokens. The SAFT was developed a few months ago by some bright lawyers in the States who thought that was the way to define a utility. They're not selling tokens now because the software hasn't been built. So what they're saying is, when we've built our platform, here are the tokens that will allow you to use it rather than paying a license fee. So people are doing SAFTs, but I'm not very keen on SAFTs. I've got to say, I think they're contingent. I don't quite see how you can have a contract which gives somebody the right to use a platform that hasn't been used yet. So the big question is, are people buying these things because they want to make money? In other words, it's an investment or a security. Or are they buying these things because they are genuine attempts to build the infrastructure for what people are calling a tokenized economy? Okay, that is a very quick run through the issues that we flagged. If there are any questions, we can try and deal with them as we go along. As I said, this was really an attempt to just point to the issues rather than start giving the answers. And I think the message that I wanted to try to give out here is that, firstly, if there's no law, go back to the other law that's already been written for other things, and you might find the answers there. And two, just be careful. The regulators are watching.
Right, yes. One question is, do you think that the FCA will follow the SEC lead in coming down, taking a pretty strict line on ICOs?
That's a very interesting question. It's always hard to read the tea leaves. It's a bit like when the Pope is being elected, try to look at the smoke and see what's going on. The message coming that I've picked up from the FCA, coming from government, is that we want London to be the centre for this activity, which is very encouraging because we've Shoreditch, we've got UCL, we've got other universities working together. A lot of the developers are here in London, and a lot of the businesses are based here in London. And we don't want these businesses to go away. So I think at the moment an encouraging view is being given by the FCA, who of course run the sandbox, where people who aren't sure about whether or not they need regulation or regulatory assistance can be offered guidance and assistance. And that is a tremendous attribute that's here. And it's the type of thing that shows that the FCA, I think, will look favourably on people who are doing it properly. But of course, the FCA are worried, as are all financial regulators, that there are a lot of crooks around. So anybody who is making a quick smash and grab, writing a white paper on the back of an envelope, I think there are some really crazy schemes out there. I saw one when I was doing a talk in the summer. Somebody actually has released a coin called a Ponzi coin. Can you believe it? They are actually saying this is a fraud. If you put your money in, you'll get a token which allows you to participate in this fraud. And blow me, $50,000 was sent in, over $50,000, to people who are running the Ponzi coin, because people thought, well, this is going to go up. That is a fraud, and it's an investment. And that's clear to me that the FCA or any other regulator or the police or the City of London Fraud Squad will jump down very, very harshly on anybody who they suspect is running something fraudulently. So the big issue to remember, and the SEC were already moving against people doing this, is the question of misrepresentation, which is something I've not really covered in this talk, because first base as a criminal lawyer is, as you know, was there a false representation fraud act, and then has somebody lost money following the representation? There doesn't even have to be a link nowadays between the fraudulent representation and the money. So in answer to your question, there doesn't seem to have been any preemptory action by the FCA. They seem to be taking a grown-up attitude, if I can use that expression, but nobody really knows. That's, I think, the answer to the question.
Interestingly, if you set up the Ponzi coin, then perhaps you're not misrepresenting anything, so you can escape any liability.
This is a genuine fraud.
So everyone understands exactly where they're coming from.
Absolutely, and you buyer beware.
Yeah. And there's one other question: if someone has launched an ICO and they've taken money from people in the US, what position do they now find themselves in?
Well, the first thing, if anybody is watching who has participated in an ICO that has offered tokens to American residents, is I would instruct an American lawyer, Okay, that's the first thing to do, because nobody actually knows what's going to happen. But what I do know is that some people are already paying money back to people who they know are registered in the States as a precautionary measure. I'm not saying that that has to happen, because I'm no American lawyer. I wouldn't know if that's the right thing to do or not. But I do know that some people are really worried, and they're not sure what the shape of the regulatory action that may follow will be. Will it be, as one of my colleagues mentioned it, will it be the men in the orange jumpsuits with the manacles, or will it be come in and have a chat, bring your checkbook and pay some tax? Those are the two different extents of what may be coming.
Neither sounds particularly attractive, but one is certainly less attractive than the other.
Well, I think I'd rather be on the checkbook side of that spectrum than the orange jumpsuit.
Great. Well, I think that's it. So thank you very much, Jeremy. Thank you for watching. It's a very fast-moving area, so no doubt in a couple of months' time things will have moved on again. But that is where we see ICO regulation at the moment. Thank you for watching Gough Square Live. The next broadcast is going to be given by Alison Lambert, I believe, on the 29th of March, and she'll be speaking about secondary ticketing. Thank you very much, and goodbye.
Thank you.